Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe my channel. My blood turned to ice when Daniel fanned the transfer confirmations across the polished mahogany table and looked at me like I was something he'd finally managed to scrape off his shoe. The recessed lights above us threw a hard white shine over the glossy paper, over the crystal water glasses, over the silver bowl of untouched clementines in the center of the table. Vivian Mercer sat at the head of it all with her back straight as a blade, one hand resting on her pearls, the other tapping a manicured nail against the wood. Graham had planted both palms on the chair in front of him, leaning in with that eager, predatory stillness some men mistake for authority. Dana stood near the leaded glass bar cart with her arms folded so tightly across her silk blouse it looked painful. And at the doorway, half in shadow, my son Owen had gone so still that even from across the room I could see the tendons in his throat moving when he swallowed. Daniel pushed one page toward me with two fingers. "Tell them where the money went." The air left my lungs like I'd been punched. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough to turn a private betrayal into theater. The papers showed the balances from our joint checking, the brokerage sweep, the reserve account we'd used to pay taxes and tuition. Numbers, dates, outgoing transfers. It was clean on the surface. Damning if you didn't know where to look. My name is Eliana Brooks Mercer. I'm 42. And this is the story of how I let my husband believe he'd turned me into the perfect villain, then used his own trap to take back every inch of my life. "Daniel," I said evenly, looking at him instead of the papers, "if you're going to accuse me of a crime, at least be precise." That landed harder than shouting would have. I watched it in the tiny shift of his jaw. Daniel had prepared for tears. For denial. For begging. He had not prepared for accuracy. Vivian inhaled through her nose, slow and offended. "Precision is not the issue, Eliana. 48 hours ago, those accounts were intact. This morning they're gutted." "Gutted?" I repeated. Interesting word. Dana gave a short laugh that had no warmth in it. "Oh, don't do that calm voice thing. We all know what this is." What this was, according to the performance laid out in front of me, was simple. I was the unstable wife. The resentful outsider. The woman who had cracked under pressure and tried to empty the family accounts before Daniel could protect himself and our son. It was such a neat little narrative. Almost elegant. If you ignored the fact that Daniel himself had given me the instructions. 3 nights earlier, just after 11, he'd come into our kitchen in stocking feet with urgency painted onto his face. The marble counters were cold under the pendant lights. A half-open bottle of Sancerre sat sweating beside the sink, and the dishwasher hummed low in the background. Daniel had loosened his tie, rolled his sleeves to his elbows, and braced both hands on the island as if steadying himself. "I need you to do something tonight," he'd said. "Right now." I had been rinsing berries for Owen's breakfast. The water ran over my fingers. I remember shutting it off and hearing, for one sharp second, only the drip from the faucet and Daniel's breathing. "What happened?" "It's temporary." He'd reached for his phone immediately, too quickly. "We've got a filing issue. A nuisance action against Mercer Civic. Attorneys think there could be a freeze on anything with my name attached until Monday. It's procedural. Nothing more. But if that happens, household liquidity gets locked too." "Household liquidity," I said. "Since when do you call our money that?" His mouth twitched. "Liana. Not tonight." Nobody called me Liana except Daniel when he wanted me softened, handled, brought back into some role he'd chosen for me. I dried my hands slowly on a dish towel and turned to face him. "What exactly are you asking?" "Move the balances from the joint accounts. All of them. Into a temporary holding account. Just for the weekend." He unlocked his phone and turned the screen toward me. "I already had Treasury set it up. It needs to come from you because your name isn't on the corporate side." There were 3 things wrong with that in the first 5 seconds. Daniel never let Treasury set up anything personal. He never used urgency without layering in reassurance. And the account he showed me was not in either of our names. It belonged to an entity called Marston Advisory LLC. I had spent 12 years in forensic accounting before I left full-time work after Owen was born. I wasn't current on every regulation anymore, but fraud still had a smell. This had it. Why would our money go to an LLC I don't recognize? "It's a bridge vehicle. Standard. It routes back Monday." "Whose vehicle?" He straightened then, irritation flashing across his face before he tucked it away. "Why are you turning this into a debate? Why are you asking me to wire 6 figures to a shell company in the middle of the night?" He stared at me. Then he softened his voice on purpose. "Because I trust you." That line would have worked on the woman I was at 32. The woman who thought composure in a man meant character. The woman who mistook polished manners for honesty. It did not work on the woman standing in a silent kitchen at 42 with a husband whose pupils had gone narrow and bright under the lights. Text me the instructions, I said. He exhaled, relieved too fast. Done. He kissed the top of my head before leaving the kitchen. His hand lingered on my shoulder for half a second too long, and I stood there watching his reflection recede in the dark window over the sink. The text arrived before he reached the stairs. Move everything out tonight. Do not leave enough for a freeze to matter. Use the routing I sent. Delete the confirmation emails after. We'll talk in the morning. Delete the confirmation emails after. That was the line that made me set the dish towel down and smile. Because guilty men always overdirect. Innocent people explain. Guilty people choreograph. I didn't transfer $1 that night. I made tea. Chamomile because my hands were too steady and I wanted them steadier. Then I sat at the kitchen island with my laptop, the brushed steel cool against my wrists, and started building my own timeline. I screen recorded his text thread. I forwarded the message chain to a new encrypted archive address. I took screenshots of the routing instructions and zoomed in on the account details. I ran the LLC name through the business registry database. Marston Advisory had been formed 11 days earlier. Registered agent, a service in Wilmington. No website. No legitimate footprint. I checked the metadata on the PDF Daniel had sent from his phone. Created by a corporate administrator account tied to Mercer Civic's internal system at 10:43 p.m. modified at 10:58 p.m. on Daniel's laptop. By midnight I had called Adrian Holt. Adrian and I had met 14 years earlier, when I was testifying in a civil asset case, and she was the junior associate who took notes with the kind of attention that made everyone else in the room look asleep. By then she'd become a partner at Holt and Wexler, downtown Chicago, white-collar investigations and family litigation with teeth. She answered on the second ring, voice rough with sleep and instantly clear. Eliana. I need 2 things, I said. A family lawyer who isn't afraid of a corporate mess, and a trust account I can move money into before my husband claims I stole it. That woke her fully. Tell me everything. So I did. Not dramatically. Just the facts. Daniel's urgency. The shell account. The instruction to delete emails. The timing. The wording. Adrian listened without interrupting except to ask for exact timestamps and account names. When I finished, there was a short silence. I could picture her in bed, lamp on now, legal pad open against her knees. Do not transfer a cent to Marston Advisory, she said. Tomorrow morning we move funds necessary for household stability and school tuition into client escrow with a paper trail that screams coercive risk mitigation. Then we notify the bank compliance team of suspected attempted marital asset diversion. Quietly. I thought you'd say that. I know, she said. Which is why you're calling before he springs phase 2. There's a phase 2. Of course there is. She was right. There always is. The next morning I drove Owen to school through a wash of pale spring rain. He sat in the passenger seat in his navy blazer, one knee bouncing, dark hair still damp from the shower. You okay? He asked when we stopped at a light on Green Bay Road. Why do you ask? He shrugged. Dad was weird last night. Daniel had been weird for months, but children often discover language for a thing after they discover the thing itself. I glanced at Owen. 17. Smart. Watchful. Too perceptive to be managed forever, even by a father who believed control was a birthright. What kind of weird? He came into my room at midnight asking if you'd seemed upset lately. Owen looked out the window. Like he was collecting answers. My hands tightened on the leather steering wheel just once. And what did you say? That if he wanted information on his own wife, he could ask her himself. Despite everything, a small warmth moved through me. The light changed. I drove on. By 10:30 that morning I was in Adrienne's office. Holt and Wexler occupied the 22nd floor of a glass tower overlooking the river, all walnut panels, brushed brass hardware, and the kind of quiet that costs money. Adrienne sat across from me in a charcoal suit, auburn hair pinned back, one legal pad to the left, one stack of printed banking regulations to the right. Beside her was Marcus Velez, a former federal investigator with silver at his temples and the unnerving calm of a man who had already heard every lie worth hearing. They worked methodically. That was the first relief. We transferred enough to cover tuition, household expenses, and retainers into Holt and Wexler's client trust. We left the rest in place but flagged the accounts with a verbal and written note. Disputed transfer request under review, no outbound movements without dual confirmation. Adrian drafted a memorandum summarizing Daniel's instruction and my concern that I was being positioned as a conduit. Marcus started tracing Marston Advisory. By mid-afternoon he had the first answer. "It gets better," he said, sliding a single-page printout across the conference table. The registered agent was standard camouflage, but the opening deposit on Marston Advisory's treasury account had come from an entity called North Loop Facilities Group. That company, in turn, had shared an office suite and accountant with a real estate vendor Mercer Civic had paid 3 times in the last quarter. Daniel's vendor. Daniel's authorization codes. Daniel's mess. That should have frightened me more than it did. Instead it steadied me. The shape of the trap had become visible. Saturday passed under a layer of forced normalcy. Vivian hosted her annual spring luncheon at the house, though luncheon was too soft a word for what it really was. It was inspection. Evaluation. Social accounting. Linen napkins pressed sharp enough to cut, white tulips in low crystal bowls, silver serving spoons lined on the sideboard like instruments. Women from the country club moved through the formal rooms in cashmere and lacquered smiles while Vivian curated family mythology in pearls and ivory silk. Daniel played devoted husband beautifully in daylight. He kept a hand light at my waist, refilled my glass before I asked, kissed my cheek in front of guests. If you didn't know him, it looked protective. If you did, you recognized the pressure behind the gentleness. His thumb rested at the exact point on my side where he could feel whether I was bracing. At one point he leaned close enough for only me to hear. "Did you take care of it?" I turned my head and met his eyes. "I took care of it." That answer satisfied him. For the moment. The performance might have lasted longer if Owen hadn't seen what he saw that night. He told me later that he couldn't sleep. He'd gone downstairs around 1 because he wanted water and heard voices in the back corridor near Daniel's study. The house was mostly dark except for the under-cabinet glow in the prep kitchen and a strip of amber light under the study door. Owen recognized Daniel's voice first. Then Vivian's. Then Graham's. Owen did not burst in. He did what children of tense homes learn to do very young. He went quiet. He stood in the shadow near the pantry and listened. When the words stopped sounding like ordinary adult conflict and started sounding like strategy, he opened the voice memo app on his phone and hit record. He didn't tell me immediately. That's the part that breaks my heart in retrospect. He didn't tell me because he was trying to protect me and because somewhere inside him he still wanted to be wrong. Sunday morning at 8:14 he knocked on my bedroom door. The room was washed in gray light. Daniel had already left the bed, leaving behind only the crease in the sheets and the faint smell of cedar and expensive cologne. I was tying my robe when Owen came in and shut the door behind him. His face was pale in a way that made him suddenly look younger than 17. "Mom," he said, voice low. "I need you to listen to something." He handed me his phone. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed play. At first it was just fabric rustling and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Then Vivian's voice, clipped and cold. "By tomorrow she either looks unstable or criminal. Preferably both." My entire body went very still. Daniel answered. "She made the transfer. That's enough." Graham gave a short laugh. "Not unless the destination account sticks." "Then we make it stick," Vivian said. "You file first thing Monday. Emergency custody. Financial dissipation. Mental instability if necessary." A chair scraped. Glass clinked. Daniel again, lower this time. "Owen stays with me. Once the account issue is on record, she won't have room to fight. There are moments when the world does not crash so much as sharpen. Every edge becomes visible. Every surface gets hard." Listening to my husband discuss using our son as leverage in the dark, I felt something inside me seal over cleanly. When the recording ended, Owen was watching me with both hands shoved into the pockets of his sweatpants. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know if I should." I set the phone down and took his face in my hands. "Listen to me," I said calmly. "You did exactly the right thing." His eyes flashed wet for a second, though he blinked it back. "What are you going to do?" I glanced toward the closed bedroom door, toward the corridor beyond it, toward the life I had been moving through as if carefulness could save it. "I'm going to let them start," I said. "Then I'm going to finish it." Which is how I ended up in the dining room 3 hours later with Daniel's papers spread before me and his family arranged around me like a jury that had skipped deliberation. Daniel lifted his chin, that practiced expression of injured dignity settling into place. "No more games. Where is the money?" "In a safer place than the one you chose," I said. Graham barked out, "What does that even mean?" "It means," I said, reaching for the top transfer sheet at last, "that you should have prepared better." Vivian leaned forward. "Eliana, enough. No, I replied quietly. I think enough is exactly what this is. I set the paper down and took out my phone. The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel's voice sharpened. Put that away. I don't think I will. Dana uncrossed her arms. Are you recording us right now? No, I said. I'm deciding which part to play first. I watched the first ripple of uncertainty move across the room. Tiny. Almost elegant. Graham's shoulders shifted. Vivian's tapping stopped. Daniel's hand came off the chair back and flattened against the table. Owen, Daniel snapped without looking at him, go upstairs. No, I said before Owen could move. He stays. That was the moment Act 1 of Daniel's little production ended. Because victims are supposed to protect children from the truth. They are supposed to usher them out, absorb the blow, preserve the aggressor's dignity in the name of family. I had done that for years in smaller ways. Softened edges. Translated tone. Filled silence with excuses. I was done translating. Owen stays, I repeated. And Daniel, if you raise your voice at him again, this gets much worse for you much faster. Daniel gave a disbelieving smile. You think you're in a position to make threats? I looked at him for a long, level second. No. I think I'm in a position to make corrections. Then I pressed play. His own voice filled the dining room. Move everything out tonight. Do not leave enough for a freeze to matter. Use the routing I sent. Delete the confirmation emails after. Nobody moved. Daniel's color changed first. Not dramatically. Just a small draining around the mouth, as if something beneath the skin had been unplugged. Graham straightened too quickly and knocked his knee against the chair. Dana's eyes flicked to Daniel, then to Vivian, then back to me. Vivian herself held still with the effort of a woman trying not to betray that she had not, in fact, been told everything. Daniel recovered first because men like him rehearse recovery as often as lies. That proves nothing. My phone could have been in your hands. I tapped my screen again. Up came the screen recording of the original text thread, complete with timestamps, metadata, and Daniel's follow-up email from his work account attaching the routing PDF. I thought you might say that, I said. Adrian had helped me build the sequence carefully. Slow enough for humiliation to bloom. Fast enough that interruptions couldn't reset the narrative. Revelation 1, I said, sliding my phone across the table so the screen faced them. You instructed the transfer from your personal device at 11:07 p.m. Thursday, and the supporting PDF was created on your Mercer Civic Administrator account 24 minutes earlier. Daniel didn't touch the phone. Revelation 2. I opened the state registry filing and enlarged the page. Marston Advisory LLC, the account you directed me to use, was formed 11 days ago. The opening deposit traces back through North Loop Facilities Group, which shares an accountant and office suite with a vendor you personally approved for payment in March and April. Graham's forehead broke into a sheen under the recessed lights. What is she talking about? I looked at him. Ask your brother. That's enough, Daniel said, but his voice had tightened. No, I said. It isn't. I took a sip of water. Small. Unhurried. I could hear Graham breathing now. Could hear the tiny crackle of Dana's bracelets as she shifted her weight. Deliberate slowness is cruel in rooms built on panic. Makes people feel time passing through them. Revelation 3, I continued. I never sent our money to Marston Advisory. Daniel blinked once. I moved a protected portion of our liquid assets into attorney escrow after notifying bank compliance of a suspected coercive transfer instruction. The remaining accounts were flagged against outbound movements pending review. Vivian's head snapped toward Daniel. Attorney? Yes, I said. Attorney. You hired counsel without telling your husband? She demanded. I hired counsel because my husband told me to send family money to an LLC and delete the evidence. That landed like a stone dropped into deep water. You couldn't see all the damage immediately, but you could feel the depth. Dana pushed off the bar cart and took 2 steps toward the table. Daniel, what did you do? He ignored her, eyes locked on me. You have no idea what you're involving yourself in. At that, I almost smiled. Actually, I said, you were involving me in fraud. I simply declined to participate. The silence that followed had weight. Graham sank into the nearest chair as if his knees had stopped working. Vivian's fingers had slipped from her pearls to the edge of the table, where her nails now pressed hard enough to whiten at the beds. Dana looked suddenly sick, like a woman realizing she had shown up to support a controlled burn and discovered a gas leak. Daniel tried once more, and because I knew him, I knew the exact form it would take. He shifted from anger to intimacy. Lowered his voice. Leaned into the version of himself that had convinced bankers, donors, and board members he was the sane center of every room. "Eliana," he said softly, "whatever you think you found, this is not the place to do this." I held his gaze. "You're right. This was your place." Then I lifted Owen's phone. Daniel's composure broke before I even pressed play. "What is that?" "Our son's recording," I said. "From last night." Owen had gone pale again by then, but he didn't look away. I wanted that said for the record inside myself. My son did not look away. I played just enough. By tomorrow she either looks unstable or criminal. Preferably both. She made the transfer. That's enough. Once the account issue is on record, she won't have room to fight. Owen stays with me. The sound quality wasn't perfect. There was a distant hum, a hollow room tone, the rustle of fabric. But the voices were unmistakable. Vivian's clipped disdain. Graham's breathy greed. Daniel's calm, strategic cruelty. Dana made a sound in the back of her throat and stepped back as if something hot had struck her. Vivian stood so abruptly her chair legs shrieked across the floor. "This is illegal." "No," I said. "It is inconvenient." Daniel went white then. Truly white. Not embarrassed. Not angry. Drained. The kind of bloodless shock that shows up when a man realizes the private room he was counting on has windows after all. He grabbed for the edge of the table. "Owen, you recorded your family?" Owen's voice shook only once, then steadied. "You mean the part where you were planning to take me from my mother?" Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, looked at me again. At last, finally, the mask split enough for me to see the raw thing underneath it. Not remorse. Not shame. Only calculation failing at speed. I leaned back in my chair. "Actually," I said, each word clean, "you were manufacturing evidence for a custody and financial fraud claim." That was the moment the room changed hands. I could feel it physically, the way a storm front shifts the pressure in a house. Graham turned on Daniel first because lesser men always do. "You told me this was protection." Vivian snapped, "Stop speaking." Dana looked at Owen, then at me, and for the first time that day there was no accusation in her face. Only horror. Daniel tried one last lunge toward control. "This family can still settle this privately." "I'm sure it can," I said. "At Holt and Wexler. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Bring your lawyer." I stood. Slowly. I slid my wedding ring off my finger and placed it on top of the transfer confirmations. The gold made a soft, almost delicate sound against the paper. Then I looked at Daniel. "They thought they had a reckless wife who'd panic on command," I said. "They had no idea I'd already spent the weekend preparing the record." The next morning, the city looked scrubbed raw by overnight rain. The sidewalks outside Holt and Wexler still held silver puddles in the seams of the concrete, and the river below the glass towers moved dark and heavy under a sky the color of steel. I arrived at 8:35 in a navy coat and low heels, carrying a leather folio and the kind of calm that isn't natural until you've practiced it under fire. The conference room on 22 had been prepared with almost ceremonial precision. Walnut walls. Frosted glass. A long table with stitched leather inlays. Water set at each place. Yellow legal pads aligned square. Morning light spread across the polished surface in pale rectangles. Authority has a texture. It lives in weight, in silence, in materials that do not need to announce themselves. Daniel had spent years borrowing that texture for himself. That morning, it belonged to people who didn't need to borrow anything. Adrian stood near the screen at the end of the room, one hand on the remote, the other resting lightly at her side. Marcus sat with 2 accordion files and a laptop open. Beside him was a woman Daniel knew very well and visibly had not expected to see. Lena Ortiz. Daniel's executive assistant for 6 years. Quiet, immaculate, always in neutral tones, always with a tablet tucked under one arm and an unreadable expression. She handled donor schedules, board packets, private travel, vendor signatures, and 100 other things powerful men tell themselves are administrative because they cannot admit where competence actually lives. When Daniel saw her, he stopped mid-step. The room behind him filled in around his shock. Daniel first, gray suit flawless but collar too tight. Vivian in cream wool, pearls again though smaller this time. As if discretion had suddenly become fashionable. Graham with his jaw set too hard. Their attorney, Charles Penfield, from Mercer and Loeb, carrying 3 binders and the expression of a man who had received only half the truth in a hurry. Dana came too, though her shoulders were folded inward now, her confidence gone from the way she held her handbag. Their body language told the story before anyone sat down. On Sunday they had entered like owners. On Monday they entered like defendants trying not to look like defendants. Adrian waited until they were seated. "Good morning," she said. "For the record, this meeting concerns potential civil and criminal exposure arising from attempted marital asset diversion, fraudulent transfer instruction, false evidentiary manufacturing, and contemplated custody abuse. We are also addressing immediate family law matters and preservation obligations." Charles Penfield cleared his throat. "That is an inflammatory characterization." Adrian gave him a professional smile with no heat in it. "Then you'll be pleased to know we're going to support each point." I sat 3 chairs down from Daniel. Close enough to see the tiny pulse flickering at his temple. Far enough that he couldn't make intimacy performative again. 72 hours after my husband stood in our kitchen and told me to move everything out of our joint accounts, my son and I sat across from him while a lawyer prepared to dismantle the life he'd mistaken for leverage. Adrian clicked the remote. The first slide appeared, timeline of relevant events. No theatrics. Just dates, times, names, and supporting documents coded in tabs. May 14th, she began. Mercer Civic approves a 6-figure payment to Stone Harbor Facilities under Daniel Mercer's authorization credentials. May 28th, a second payment clears. June 3rd, Marston Advisory LLC is formed. June 6th at 10:43 p.m., a PDF containing routing instructions for Marston Advisory is created using a Mercer Civic administrative account assigned to Daniel Mercer. June 6th at 11:07 p.m., Mr. Mercer instructs Mrs. Mercer via text to transfer all liquid household funds into that account and delete confirmation emails. June 7th, Mrs. Mercer instead places essential assets into attorney escrow and notifies bank compliance of suspected coercive transfer activity. June 8th, overnight, discussions are recorded among Daniel Mercer, Vivian Mercer, and Graham Mercer regarding efforts to characterize Mrs. Mercer as unstable or criminal and to pursue emergency custody based on the manufactured account narrative. She clicked again. Document images. Metadata. Routing details. Registry filings. Bank memos. Penfield leaned forward. "I would like copies of all source materials." "You'll have them," Adrian said. "After we finish establishing why your clients are not to destroy anything." Daniel finally spoke. "Lena," he said, turning toward his assistant, "what exactly are you doing here?" Lena folded her hands on the table. She wore a sand-colored blouse under a dark blazer, hair pinned low at the nape of her neck. If she was nervous, only the careful stillness of her fingers showed it. "I'm correcting the record," she said. Graham gave a short, disbelieving scoff. "You work for us." Lena looked at him. "No. I worked for payroll." "There is a difference." Adrian didn't interrupt. She let the implication settle over the room like dust after plaster breaks. "Lena Ortiz has provided sworn statements and corroborating records," Adrian said. "Specifically, she has identified irregular requests by Daniel Mercer to route vendor approvals outside normal review channels, to draft Treasury-adjacent documents using internal templates for non-corporate accounts, and to suppress copies of external confirmations." Daniel turned fully toward Lena then, and I saw it happen in real time. The precise instant he recognized he had not, in fact, been the only person in the room keeping records. "You said you deleted those drafts." Lena's face did not change. "You said a lot of things. That was our unexpected ally, though the truth was she had only been unexpected to the people who underestimated her." Daniel trusted Lena because he didn't really see her. Men like him rarely do. She had switched sides for the oldest reason in the world. Self-preservation sharpened by conscience. Marcus took over next, voice steady, practical. Ms. Ortiz came forward after discovering that a June 4th authorization memo bearing her initials had been altered after signature. That memo would have implicated her in routing the Marston Advisory documentation. She retained local copies, including version history. He slid a packet toward Penfield. "Additionally," Marcus said, "we traced the beneficial owner chain behind Marston Advisory to a trust vehicle whose servicing correspondence routes through a private mailbox used previously by North Loop Facilities Group. That mailbox was accessed by a courier retained through Mercer Civic's executive office." Penfield flipped pages faster now. Vivian's breathing had gone shallow. Graham stared at Daniel with naked alarm. Dana had stopped pretending she wasn't there out of obligation. She was there because she needed to hear exactly how far the rot went. Daniel tried dismissal. "Circumstantial." "No," Marcus said. "Layered." Adrian clicked to the next slide. A screenshot of calendar entries. Hotel receipts. Rideshare invoices. Late-night office access logs. "Separate but relevant," Adrian said. These materials establish not only concealment but premeditation. Mr. Mercer spent the last 6 weeks creating parallel narratives. One for financial diversion. One for personal destabilization. For example, on June 1st he consulted a family law attorney regarding emergency custody standards before any alleged dissipation had occurred. On June 5th he altered account alerts on the Joint Reserve Fund. On June 7th he sent a draft note to a household physician inquiring whether sudden emotional volatility had been observed in his wife. Vivian's head whipped toward him. "You involved Dr. Heller." Daniel's jaw hardened. "I was documenting concerns." "Concerns you manufactured," Adrian said. "There is something deeply satisfying about watching manipulation translated into plain nouns. It strips it of glamour. Documentation. Routing. Alteration. Exposure. Conspiracy. These are ugly words, sturdy words. They leave less room for charm." Then Adrian did something even better. She gave the room back to me for a moment. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, "would you like to explain why you did not confront Mr. Mercer immediately Thursday night?" I folded my hands over my folio and looked at Daniel. "Because I wanted you to keep going," I said. "I wanted to see the full shape of it." He gave a humorless laugh. "You expect anyone to believe you were in control." "Not anyone," I said. "Just the people who matter." Graham muttered, "Jesus Christ." I turned my eyes to him. "You should save that energy for your own counsel." That set him off. This was Daniel's idea. Vivian snapped, "Stop talking." "No, Mother, stop talking," Graham shot back. "You told him to hit her first on custody." Dana made a strangled sound. "Are you all listening to yourselves?" And there it was. The fracture. Not dramatic in the beginning. Just hairline cracks spreading under pressure. These families don't explode all at once. They split along old fault lines. Resentment. Favoritism. Fear. Money. Who knew what? Who was protected? Who was expected to fall on the sword? Penfield held up a hand. "Everyone needs to be quiet." Adrian nodded once. "I agree. Because the next part matters." She clicked again. The screen filled with a side-by-side image. On the left, the original PDF Daniel sent me. On the right, version history from Mercer Civic's internal document system, recovered through Lena and matched to Daniel's credentials. Highlighted metadata. Edit timestamps. User tokens. A neat chain linking him directly to the document he had hoped to place in my hands without residue. Penfield's shoulders dropped half an inch. It was the first honest movement he'd made since entering the room. "Daniel," he said carefully, "did you create this file?" Daniel said nothing. "Daniel." He finally leaned back in his chair and looked not at Penfield, not at me, but at the ceiling for one brief second, as if there might still be a hidden exit above him. When he lowered his gaze, the polish had worn off. He looked older. Smaller somehow. "I asked for a temporary vehicle," he said. "The rest has been exaggerated." Adrian's expression didn't change. "Exaggerated into your own timestamps." Vivian turned to him in disbelief. "You told us it was a protective transfer." He snapped then, anger finally outrunning strategy. "Because that's how you wanted it framed." The room went dead silent. If Sunday had been about Daniel discovering he no longer controlled the story, Monday became about everyone else discovering he had never intended to protect them either. Graham stood abruptly. "I need my own lawyer." "Sit down," Vivian hissed. "No." Dana laughed then, a brittle, stunned sound. "For once, I agree with him." Penfield rubbed a hand over his mouth. "My advice to all Mercer family members present is to stop discussing substance without separate counsel." Adrian let that hang, then delivered the blow she had been saving. "We are prepared to make referrals this afternoon," she said. "Bank compliance already has notice. If this matter is not resolved immediately, we will supplement with the recorded discussions regarding fabricated instability claims and contemplated false custody filings. We will also notify Mercer Civic's board that internal systems were used to construct a personal shell transfer instrument tied to a vendor payment pattern currently under trace review." Vivian whispered, "The board." "Yes," Adrian said. "The board." "What do you want?" Penfield asked at last. There it was. Not outrage. Not denial. The only question that matters once leverage changes hands. Adrian slid a packet across the table. "Immediate standstill on all household and corporate adjacent account movements touching marital assets. Temporary exclusive occupancy transfer of the Winnetka residence to Mrs. Mercer and Owen Mercer for 30 days or until alternate arrangements are completed. Interim support. No emergency custody filing. Mutual restraining provisions regarding financial misrepresentation. Daniel Mercer to resign from financial signatory authority at Mercer Civic pending internal review. Full forensic production within 5 business days. And a recorded acknowledgement that the June 6 transfer request originated from Mr. Mercer. Penfield scanned the first page. This is extensive. This is restrained, Adrian said. Daniel finally looked at me directly again. You planned this. I met his eyes. I prepared for you. You want to destroy me? No, I said. I want you documented. That line seemed to hit him harder than anything else all morning. Because destruction can be romanticized. Documentation cannot. It is plain. It is clerical. It is final. He leaned toward me, voice low and tight. You were supposed to trust me. I didn't lower mine. I did, I said. That's why I noticed when your lies got lazy. Across from us, Lena opened one of her folders and slid a small stack of printed emails toward Penfield. These are the deletion requests, she said. And these are the board calendar changes made to create a private window before market open Monday, in case you needed time to file without scrutiny. Penfield closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he had the look of a man calculating billable hours against irreversible damage. What else exists? He asked. I answered before Adrian could. Enough. He nodded once. Then my clients should sign the standstill. Vivian recoiled. Charles? If they don't, he said quietly, I withdraw and they deal with the consequences in public. There is an artistry to capitulation in expensive rooms. Nobody shouts when real stakes finally arrive. They just start moving paper. Copies were set out. Signature tabs peeled back. Water glasses lifted, set down, lifted again. Graham refused to look at Daniel. Dana signed where Penfield indicated, not because she was liable for everything, but because Adrian had included household non-interference provisions and document preservation obligations tied to family accounts. Vivian argued twice over language, then stopped when Marcus placed the transcript excerpt in front of her with her own words highlighted in yellow. Preferably both. That phrase did more work than any lecture could have. Daniel was last. He held the pen without signing for nearly a minute. His face had settled into a strange stillness, the kind men mistake for strength when they are really only cornered. I watched his thumb rub once along the barrel. Watched him calculate futures. Public board review. Criminal referral. Owen hearing every next lie. Investors. Donors. The country club. The law. Then he signed. Not gracefully. Not with dignity. Just ink on paper. A name dragging slightly at the end because his hand was no longer as steady as he wanted anyone to believe. Adrian gathered the pages. Marcus witnessed. Penfield requested copies. Lena closed her folder. I stood. So did Daniel. Reflex more than intention. For one absurd second it almost looked like the old choreography. The husband rising when his wife did. The polished couple leaving together. The image he had fed rooms for years. Then I looked at the signed agreement, then at him. You were always very concerned with appearances, I said quietly. Next time, make sure the woman managing them isn't working for both sides. His face changed. Just once. A flicker of something raw and unguarded. Not because I had insulted him. Because I had described him accurately. I turned to Vivian next. She sat rigid in her chair, pearls gleaming against her throat, hands folded so tightly I thought the joints might lock. You were right about one thing, I said. Character does reveal itself under pressure. Then I picked up my folio and walked out. The next few weeks were a study in controlled demolition. I moved first. Not because I was fleeing, but because staying in the Winnetka house any longer than necessary felt like sleeping inside a museum of my own underestimation. Every room held some version of me that had been arranged for display. The breakfast nook with the hand-painted ceramics I never truly liked but Vivian admired. The pale linen drapes I had spent months choosing while Daniel spent months not noticing them. The polished limestone foyer where I had welcomed donors, school parents and family friends with a smile so practiced it had become architecture. By the end of the month, Owen and I were in a sunlit rental in East Lakeview while the larger settlement unfolded. It had oak floors that creaked faintly in the mornings and tall windows that caught the lake light in long clean stripes across the kitchen. The counters were honed black stone. The cabinets were simple maple, not ostentatious, not chosen to impress anyone. Our mugs lived in mismatched rows. Owen's backpack landed on the same chair every day. The place smelled like coffee, clean laundry, and the basil plant he insisted we keep alive on the sill. The first morning I woke there alone before dawn, I stood barefoot at the stove in a soft gray sweater and listened to the kettle begin its low metallic hum. Outside, the city was just stirring. Delivery trucks below. A jogger in a bright windbreaker moving along the path by the lake. The sky opening slowly from blue-black to pearl. I poured coffee into a heavy ceramic mug and watched steam rise in the new light. Fresh starts are rarely dramatic. They are usually quiet. A different floor under your feet. A window that faces another direction. A morning in which nobody is monitoring your expression for weakness. The karmic justice, when it came, was almost annoyingly symmetrical. Daniel lost financial signatory authority at Mercer Civic within 48 hours of our meeting. The board announced he was taking a leave of absence pending internal review. 2 weeks later, that leave became a resignation. Publicly, it was framed as a transition. Privately, 3 directors had no appetite for a CFO whose metadata tied him to shell transfer documents and potential vendor irregularities. His name disappeared from the website by Friday afternoon. Vivian Mercer didn't lose money first. She lost audience. Which for her was far worse. The women who had once angled for seats near her at charity luncheons began developing prior commitments. Her museum committee restructured. The foundation board requested a temporary pause in her advisory role, to avoid distraction. In towns like ours, social exile is rarely declared. It arrives in the form of thinner invitations, cooler smiles, tables where no one saved you the center seat. Graham hired separate counsel and spent a miserable summer trying to explain why he had attended strategic conversations involving a fraudulent narrative without, in his words, appreciating the seriousness. Men like Graham always imagine intent is a hallway they can step out of after the fire starts. It isn't. He was forced out of operations by early fall and shifted into some meaningless consultant title that sounded expensive and came with no real power. Dana, to her credit, did something harder than the rest of them. She stopped defending what was indefensible. It didn't make her noble. It made her late. But late can still matter. The family physician Daniel had tried to prime with concern notes documented the interaction and declined further involvement. The accountant tied to North Loop facilities suddenly became very cooperative once investigators began asking about invoice sequencing. Mercer Civic's outside auditors expanded their review window. A vendor nobody had thought twice about in March became a problem by August. And Daniel himself became smaller in all the places he had once been oversized. Professionally, socially, psychologically. He moved into a glass rental in River North and, according to people who still tracked such things, spent the first month telling anyone who would listen that the situation was a misunderstanding exploited by aggressive counsel. That line works exactly until someone asks for specifics. He tried calling me the first night after he resigned. Then the next morning. Then by text. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Owen shouldn't be hearing things from other people. You're making reconciliation impossible. By the second week the messages changed flavor. I never meant for it to escalate. My mother pushed harder than I wanted. I miss my family. The apartment is quiet. Do you remember Capri? That one almost made me laugh. Capri. As if a photograph-quality memory of lemon trees and hotel balconies could erase a plan to paint me unstable and take my son. I archived every message without responding. Vivian texted twice. Once to say she was praying for wisdom to prevail. Once to say public conflict helped no one. Graham emailed through counsel only. Dana left a voicemail crying and apologizing, then sent a much better follow-up message the next day that contained no tears and no excuses, just 6 words. Ishold have believed what I heard. Owen ignored Daniel for a week. Then, with the kind of moral clarity teenagers sometimes have before adulthood teaches them compromise, he agreed to meet him only in the presence of a therapist. That condition rattled Daniel more than anger would have. Performance is difficult in rooms where a professional keeps asking, "What did you mean when you said that?" The strangest communication came from a number I didn't recognize one Tuesday afternoon in July while I was reviewing office lease papers. "I hear you're the woman who ruined Daniel Mercer's summer." There was no name attached. Only that line. I stared at it for a second then wrote back, "If you're looking for a support group you may need a larger room." 3 dots appeared. Vanished. Reappeared. Fair enough. I'm Camille Duval. We should probably have coffee. Camille turned out to be 36, elegant, self-possessed, and until very recently under the impression that Daniel Mercer was almost divorced, tragically misunderstood, and burdened by a wife who had become erratic. She met me at a cafe on Southport in a cream trench coat and tortoiseshell sunglasses, set them neatly beside her cappuccino and said with admirable lack of ornament, "I brought copies." Calendar screenshots. Hotel invoices. Messages. Not because I needed them by then for the core case, but because Daniel had sold the same story to multiple women and she was done being a supporting actress in his fiction. I don't want revenge, she told me, fingers wrapped around the porcelain cup. I want my reality back. I understood that. We were not friends then. We were simply two intelligent women sorting receipts left by the same careless man. But there was dignity in that too. Clean acknowledgement. No melodrama. No competition where only he had benefited from it. By late summer, I had done something I never would have predicted in the first week after the meeting at Holt and Wexler. I started working again. Not returning in the old sense because I wasn't going back to the life I'd left. Building something new from skills I had once treated as prior versions of myself. Adrian gave me the push. You know what you did here, right? She said one evening over takeout sushi in her office while the windows burned gold with sunset. I saved myself. She smiled. Yes. And you also mapped a financial coercion case faster than half the consultants I know. So I launched Brooks Advisory Group out of a compact office in River North with matte black fixtures, white oak shelving, and one enormous table where clients could spread out documents without feeling like they were confessing. I focused on forensic review for family-held businesses, marital asset tracing, and coercive control financial consulting. The work came quietly at first. A referral from Adrian. Then 2 more from therapists. Then a woman from Evanston who sat in my office twisting the strap of her handbag and said, I think my husband keeps making me sign things when I'm tired. Then a restaurateur who realized his brother had been skimming through a vendor entity with a familiar mailbox setup. Then a nonprofit director who needed help understanding why her ex had moved money through tuition reserves before filing for custody. There is something almost holy about using the very skills someone tried to weaponize against you and turning them into shelter for other people. I wasn't alone in the rebuilding either. Lena left Mercer Civic within a month and joined a governance advisory firm downtown. We had lunch twice, then 4 times, then the kind of easy professional friendship formed under odd circumstances and strengthened by mutual respect. She once told me, over grilled salmon and sparkling water, the most dangerous thing Daniel ever did was assume I preferred loyalty to evidence. Adrian remained Adrian, which is to say razor-sharp, impatient with self-pity, unexpectedly funny after 1 glass of wine, and perhaps the single best person to have in your corner when someone confuses polish with legal strategy. And Owen, my quiet, brave, infuriatingly perceptive son, got lighter. That's the only word for it. He laughed more in the new apartment. Played music while doing homework. Stopped checking my face every time his phone buzzed. He still had hard days, of course. Trust doesn't rebound because paperwork gets signed. But the vigilance began to drain from him slowly, the way floodwater recedes from steps 1 line at a time. One Saturday in October we were making eggs in our small kitchen while sunlight flashed off the stainless steel kettle and turned the basil leaves bright green on the sill. Owen was wearing an old college sweatshirt of mine and trying to flip a piece of sourdough in the pan without a spatula. You're going to ruin breakfast, I said. Confidence is part of the technique. That's what your father thinks about accounting. He laughed so hard he nearly did ruin breakfast. Then he set the bread down and glanced at me with that sideways seriousness that always catches me off guard. Do you ever wish you hadn't found out? I took a second before answering. The pan hissed softly. Outside, a bus exhaled at the curb. No, I said. I wish it had never been true. That's different. He nodded once. Good. A week later Dana called. Not crying this time. Not apologizing performatively. Just calling. I ran into someone from the club, she said. You won't believe who I just saw doing donor intake at the museum gala. I smiled into my tea. Vivian. With a volunteer badge. Was it gold? It was laminated, Dana said, and for the first time in months we both laughed. That's what people rarely tell you about aftermath. Justice doesn't only arrive in courtrooms and settlement agreements. Sometimes it arrives in a friend's dry voice over speakerphone while you're standing barefoot in your own kitchen and chopping parsley for dinner. By winter, Daniel's messages had thinned into occasional attempts at nostalgia or self-repair. I know I made mistakes. I'd like the chance to explain. The family isn't the same. No, I thought more than once while archiving them. It isn't. He sent Owen longer messages than he sent me. Some sincere, some manipulative, some impossible to separate cleanly because people are rarely made of one motive at a time. Owen answered when he felt like it. He refused when he didn't. Boundaries became his first adult language and I was absurdly proud of how fluently he learned it. The formal divorce settled in January, 8 months after the night in the kitchen. By then the financial review had widened enough that Penfield urged Daniel toward cooperation in every arena where cooperation still bought him breath. I got what mattered: clean division, the apartment fund rolled into my name, tuition secured, retained interests fully disclosed, and a parenting structure that did not reward attempted coercion. More important than the numbers was the record itself. The lies had not simply failed. They had been named. That naming changed me more than I expected. There is a version of me that existed for years inside the Mercer world. She was competent, polished, likable, and perpetually translating. She absorbed tension so dinners could continue. She explained Daniel to people. She explained Vivian to herself. She took complexity and turned it into acceptable social temperature. She mistook endurance for virtue because no one had ever taught her to distinguish the two. I don't hate that woman. I feel tenderness toward her now. She was doing the best she could with the information she allowed herself to admit. But she was still living like someone waiting to be granted full citizenship in her own life. The woman I became after all of it doesn't wait very much. That evening in early March, the sunset came in low and honey-colored over the lake, laying an orange glow across the windows of my apartment and turning the glass buildings in the distance briefly soft. The city lights had just started to prick on one by one when the doorbell rang. Camille stood there with a bottle of sparkling rose and a paper bag from a bakery in Lincoln Park. "I come bearing carbohydrates and gossip," she said. By then, improbably, she had become part of the after. Not because either of us would have chosen the origin story, but because life is strange and sometimes the person who once occupied the margins of your pain becomes someone who understands the shape of the lie better than anyone else. We had graduated from evidence exchanges to occasional dinners, from careful neutrality to something like hard-won affection. She stepped onto the balcony with me a few minutes later, the stones still holding a trace of day's warmth. Below us, traffic moved in ribbons of white and red. The air smelled faintly of rain and distant chimney smoke. Owen was out with friends, which left the apartment quiet in the best possible way. Camille handed me a glass. "To impossible women," she said. I smiled. "To accurate records." We touched rims lightly. For a while we just stood there, watching the sun lower itself behind the city. She leaned one elbow on the railing, hair catching the last gold light. I thought about how absurd it would have sounded a year earlier to imagine sharing a calm evening with a woman Daniel had lied to almost as thoroughly as he lied to me. But that was one of the stranger gifts buried in the wreckage. Once the central manipulator is removed, the people he triangulated sometimes stop being strangers to one another. Sometimes they become witnesses. Sometimes, if you're lucky, they become something gentler. "Do you ever thank him?" Camille asked after a while, not looking at me. "Out loud?" "Never." She laughed. I turned the stem of the glass between my fingers and watched the last strip of orange deepen over the water. "But internally," I said, "in the most private and uncharitable corners of my soul, yes." She tilted her head. "That's healthier than I expected." "It's not gratitude for what he did," I said. "It's gratitude for the fact that he pushed hard enough to end the part of me that would have stayed." Camille was quiet for a moment. Then she raised her glass again, smaller this time, almost to herself. "To endings that do us a favor." "To endings that tell the truth," I replied. When she left, I stayed out on the balcony alone. The city had fully lit by then. Windows glowed in stacked squares. Headlights moved below like restless beads of light on dark thread. Somewhere farther down the block, someone laughed. A train groaned over metal tracks. The evening air pressed cool against my skin. I thought about the woman in the kitchen on that Thursday night, hands still damp from rinsing berries, looking at a husband she had already begun to lose but had not yet fully seen. I thought about the Sunday dining room with its hard white light and polished wood. About Owen in the doorway, brave enough to tell the truth when the adults around him were trying to weaponize it. About the conference table downtown where signatures finally replaced narratives. About the first morning in this apartment, coffee in hand, when silence stopped feeling like danger and started feeling like peace. I had once believed strength looked like accommodation. Like staying measured while other people overreached. Like preserving structures no matter what they cost me. Now I know strength can be quieter and sharper than that. It can look like records saved before midnight. A son trusted with the truth. A lawyer called early. A door closed cleanly. A future built not from fantasy but from evidence. I was not destroyed. I was clarified. And if I'm honest, there are nights when I still think of Daniel and Vivian and the whole glittering architecture of the Mercer world with something close to gratitude, though not the soft kind. The useful kind. The kind reserved for storms that tear the dead branches down and show you which parts of your house were never load-bearing to begin with. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about becoming impossible to trap again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about what they lose. It's about what you finally refuse to lose in yourself.